Picture the most useless building you can imagine. It grows nothing. It makes nothing. It stores nothing. It sells nothing. It just stands there, being tall. People pay to ride an elevator to the top, stare at the view for 20 minutes, and ride back down. It sounds like the single dumbest business in the entire world. It is not. One deck on top of one building in New York pulled in more than $130 million in a single year and kept about 70 cents of every single dollar as pure profit. A tiny platform out-earned 2.5 million square feet of offices sitting right below it. By the end of this video, you will know what a tower like that actually costs to own, why the thing it sells is almost free to produce, and why the very same idea has bankrupted bold men who bet everything they had on it. The buy-in. You have looked up at one of these your whole life. The needle over the city. The tower with the restaurant that slowly spins. The observation deck at the top of the famous skyscraper. You have never once asked the obvious question, who owns that? And how on earth does being tall make money? Here is what you are actually buying. Not a building in the normal sense. You are buying altitude. A structure whose entire product is the act of standing above everything else so that people will pay to come up and look. Think of the Needle in Seattle, the Great Tower in Toronto, the Iron Giant in Paris. Different shapes, one identical business. Each one is a bet that being higher than everyone else is something people will pay to feel. There are two ways to own that product. The first is a standalone observation tower, the freestanding needle built for one purpose, to be climbed. The second is an observation deck, a paid platform bolted onto the top of a skyscraper that also holds offices or a hotel below it. Neither one is cheap. Building an iconic tower runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Even carving a world-class deck into the top of an existing skyscraper can cost well over $100 million once you add the high-speed elevators, the glass, the lighting, and the experience around it. This is not a lemonade stand. It is one of the most expensive single attractions a person can build. One brand new deck carved into a New York skyscraper reportedly cost its owner well over $200 million just for the attraction, before it sold a single ticket. So who owns them? Cities and private operators own the great standalone towers. Big real estate companies, often listed on the stock market, own the decks on top of their skyscrapers. And a handful of specialist firms now exist just to run these attractions for whoever holds the keys. A whole industry of operators has grown up around this. Companies that do nothing but design, staff, and run other people's views for a share of the take. The asset was never the steel, and it was never the floors of office space. The asset is the view, and the crowd willing to pay for it. What you inherit. Say you own the tower. Here is what comes with it, whether you like it or not. You inherit elevators, and elevators quietly rule this entire business. A tower can only earn as fast as it can lift bodies to the top and bring them back down. No matter how many millions of people want to go up, your ceiling is set by how many the lifts can move in an hour. The elevator is the cash register, and it only rings so fast. At one downtown tower, 5 high-speed elevators were built to carry around 5 million visitors a year, and that number, not demand, is the real limit on the business. You inherit relentless maintenance. Paint on a giant steel tower is not decoration, it is armor against rust, and repainting one can take tons of paint and months of work. Glass gets cleaned, structures get inspected. A revolving restaurant is a machine, and machines break. The most famous tower in the world gets repainted by hand every few years, using tons of paint each time, purely to hold back the rust. You inherit the weather. High wind shuts you down. Lightning shuts you down. Fog erases the one thing you are selling, the view. And on a gray day, the customer paid full price for a cloud. You cannot store a sunny day, and you cannot sell yesterday's view twice. Every empty hour is gone for good, and every closed day is revenue you can never make back. You inherit security. Ever since the world got nervous about tall, famous buildings, you screen the people going up, which costs money and slows the line at the exact choke point that already limits your revenue. And you inherit the deepest risk of all. You have made a permanent, unmovable bet on one city, and on the idea that tourists will keep coming to this exact spot forever. The revenue layers. Now the fun part. because a good tower earns from more directions than you would guess. Layer 1 is admission. The ticket to go up is the heart of it, and the pricing has turned ruthless. At a famous New York deck, a standard adult ticket runs about $79, and it climbs past $90 if you want to be up there for sunset. Some owners now use surge pricing, the same trick as a rideshare app, where the ticket quietly gets more expensive as demand rises. At another New York deck, that ruthless pricing helped pull in more than $133 million in a single year. Layer 2 is food and drink. Put a restaurant at the top, and you are not really selling dinner. You are selling a table inside the view, and people pay a steep premium for the seat. Layer 3 is events. Weddings, corporate parties, private hires. A skyline behind the toast is worth a fortune to the right buyer. A brand new downtown observatory that expected around 5 million visitors a year could clear more than $100 million on tickets alone. Layer 4 is retail and photos. The gift shop at the exit, the souvenir picture they snapped of you as you walked in, and now sell back to you on the way out. Some towers even rent their summit to broadcasters, collecting a quiet check for the antennas most visitors never notice. Every one of these streams lands on the same crowd, riding up the same elevators, for a view that costs the owner nothing extra to show them. Layer 5 is the experience upsell. A glass floor you can stand on, a ledge you can lean out over, a thrill ride bolted to the very top. Each one is an extra ticket on top of the ticket. Now stack it together. Millions of visitors, times tens of dollars each, on a product that costs almost nothing to hand over one more time. Which brings us to the number that breaks people's brains. Listen to that again. At the most famous observation deck in New York, the observatory brought in around $136 million in a single recent year. It spent under $37 million to run. That left close to $100 million in operating profit from one deck. That is a margin of roughly 70%. Listen to that again. 70 cents of profit on every dollar that walks through the turnstile. It was not always this obvious. When the owner first revealed the numbers, the deck was already pulling in around $60 million a year, a figure one real estate magnate called an astounding amount of money. And here is the part that should stop you cold. That building holds more than 2.5 million square feet of office space in one of the most famous addresses on the planet. And the observation deck at the top, a sliver of the whole structure, earns more than all of those offices combined. Investors have valued that one deck at around $1.7 billion, which works out to more than $20,000 for every single square foot. Because you are not selling space up there, you are selling air, and air costs almost nothing to sell again to the next person in line. That is why the most valuable square feet in one of the most famous buildings on Earth are not the offices. They are the deck at the very top, the ledger. So where does the money go? Because a 70% margin does not mean the costs are zero. It means the ones you have are dwarfed by the view. Start with construction, the giant upfront number. Hundreds of millions of dollars, spent years before a single ticket sells, and it never fully comes back if the crowds do not show. Then the elevators, both to build and to maintain, and the invisible ceiling they place on how much you can ever earn in a day. A perfect day still ends the moment the last lift comes down. Cram the calendar with sunshine and crowds, and the elevators still decide how big the day can be. Then the upkeep, paint, glass, steel inspection, and a revolving floor that has to keep revolving. Then insurance, on a structure that hangs paying customers 1,000 feet in the air. Then staff, security screening, and the marketing to keep reminding the world you exist. Then the experience arms race. The newest decks are not simple platforms anymore. They are mirrored art installations and glass ledges that cost a fortune to build and a fortune to keep fresh, which is why one dazzling new deck can spend nearly as much as it earns. One celebrated new attraction pulled in more than $133 million and spent nearly $112 million of it. A reminder that spectacle is costly to keep alive, and underneath all of it sits the one cost you can never escape. You are chained, permanently, to the fortunes of one city, the trap. Here is the trap, and it is a brutal one. You have built a machine that only prints money as long as a crowd keeps arriving at one exact spot on the map. And crowds are fragile. A recession thins them out. A pandemic erases them overnight, and a tower full of fixed costs still has to be lit, heated, insured, and painted while nobody comes. A single frightening event in the city can scare tourists away for a year. Your revenue can vanish, while your bills do not move an inch. When the world shut its borders, the great decks sat empty for months, while every fixed cost kept right on ticking. Then there is the rival. Towers do not really wear out. They get outshone. The moment a taller, newer, more thrilling deck opens across town, the crowd drifts to the new view, and your icon becomes yesterday's icon. This is not a fear, it is a written fact. One famous New York building openly warned its own investors that new observation decks opening nearby could pull its visitors away. In a single decade, that one city went from a couple of famous decks to 5 of them, all fighting over the same tourists. And even on your best day, that elevator ceiling is still there, capping how much a perfect location can ever earn. Own an observation tower, and you do not own a money printer. You own a monument, and a monument only pays while the world keeps choosing to visit it. And a monument is almost impossible to sell or move. You cannot pick it up and carry it to a better city. The man who built the first one. To understand this business, meet the man who built the most famous tower on Earth, and who almost lost it to a wrecking crew. Gustave Eiffel. His tower rose in Paris for the World's Fair of 1889, a lattice of iron reaching nearly 1,000 feet into the sky, built in about 26 months from more than 18,000 iron pieces and 2.5 million rivets. It was, at the time, the tallest structure humans had ever made. It went up for the 100-year anniversary of the French Revolution, meant to dazzle the fair and then quietly disappear. And people hated it. While it was still going up, around 300 of the most celebrated artists and writers in France signed an open letter of protest, calling it monstrous, a tragic street lamp, the dishonor of Paris. One of those critics, the novelist Guy de Maupassant, is said to have eaten lunch at the tower constantly because it was the only spot in the whole city from which he could not see the thing he hated. Worse for Eiffel, he had only been given a 20-year permit for the land. In 1909, the tower was scheduled to be torn down and sold for scrap. So Eiffel did something clever, and it is the lesson at the heart of this whole channel. He made the tower useful. He paid, out of his own pocket, to put a giant antenna at the summit and handed it to the military for wireless telegraphy. From that height, signals could reach across the country and out to sea. Suddenly, the useless eyesore was a strategic asset, and the city granted him a 70-year extension instead of the axe. The crowds had already come in such numbers that the tower began paying for itself almost from the start. That saved it. And the view he had been selling from the start kept paying. Today, that tower is the most visited paid monument on the planet, drawing millions of people a year to do nothing but ride up and look. Close to 7 million visitors climb it every single year, more than a century after it was meant to be scrapped for its iron. The man was mocked for building the most useless structure in France. He had actually built one of the most profitable, the biggest failure, all in all, now, the other side of the same dream. Because for every Eiffel, there is a man who reached for the sky and fell straight through the floor. His name was Bob Stupak, and they called him the Polish Maverick. Stupak was a Las Vegas showman, a gambler and promoter, and in 1990, he set out to build the tallest freestanding tower in the entire world, right on the edge of the Strip. He had already built a gaudy space-themed casino on the very same spot, and the tower was meant to be the giant beacon that pulled the whole world to his door. He wanted it to soar past 1,800 feet. Air safety officials said no, and capped it at 1,149 feet, still the tallest observation tower in the country. Safety rules had clipped the wings off his biggest dream before the first beam even went up. Everything that could go wrong did. A fire tore through the structure during construction. The budget, first imagined at a fraction of the sum, ballooned toward $550 million. Stupak ran short of money and had to give up control just to get it finished. A poker friend put up the cash and bought Stupak out of much of his own dream for around $51 million. It finally opened on April 30th, 1996, and it was built on a fatal flaw. The whole point of the tower was to pull crowds into the casino at its base, but the design let visitors reach the tower without ever passing the gambling floor. The bet at the heart of the building never paid off. Add a rough neighborhood and fierce competition, and the collapse came fast. Within about 9 months, by January of 1997, the company filed for bankruptcy. The stock cratered from $17 a share to almost nothing, and a famous corporate raider swept in and took the whole thing over in the wreckage. Years later, the tower changed hands again for well over $1 billion, long after the man who dreamed it had lost it. The lesson is simple and merciless. A tower is a giant, fixed, unmovable bet. Get the height, get the view, and still lose everything. If the location is wrong, the crowd is thin, or the money behind you runs out before the tourists arrive. How the survivors do it. So who actually wins in the altitude business? The ones who survive all follow a few rules. First, they sell an experience, not just a view. The newest decks are mirrored rooms, glass ledges, open-air terraces designed for a photo that spreads across the internet for free. A plain platform charges $20. An unforgettable one charges $90 and fills every slot. A single stunning photo taken at the top spreads across the internet for free, doing the marketing that once cost a fortune. Second, they own an icon in a city the whole world already wants to visit. Location is not one factor here, it is nearly the entire game. A legendary view in a magnet city prints money. The same tower in a place nobody flies to is a bankruptcy waiting to happen. Third, they stack every layer. Tickets, timed and surge priced. Dining, weddings, private events, photos, merchandise. They squeeze revenue out of every square foot of a platform that cost them a fortune to build. Fourth, they manage the one true limit. The elevator. Timed entry, staggered slots, premium pricing at the busiest hours, all to wring the most money out of a fixed number of trips to the top. The best operators treat every elevator car like a seat on a sold-out flight. They bolt thrill rides and glass ledges to the roof, turning a simple view into a dare people brag about surviving. And fifth, they never stop reinvesting, because the survivors know the newest, tallest, shiniest deck in town is always coming for their crowd. Does this actually work? So does owning an observation tower actually work? It is one of the widest gaps between winning and losing on this entire channel. Picture the good version. You own the deck on top of a world-famous building. In a city tourists cross oceans to see. You sell tens of dollars of altitude to millions of people a year, at a margin near 70%, with surge pricing on the busiest nights. Your single deck earns more than millions of square feet of prime offices and gets valued in the billions. One such deck alone was recently valued at around $1.7 billion. It is, quite possibly, the highest margin product in all of real estate. You are selling air, and the world keeps lining up to buy it. Almost every extra dollar of it falls to the bottom line, because the millionth visitor costs you barely more than the first. Now the bad version. You bet $550 million on a tower in the wrong part of the wrong block, with a design that fails at the one job it was built for. The crowds you counted on split between a dozen rivals. The fixed costs never stop, and within a single year you are handing the keys to your creditors. Your dream sold for scrap on the courthouse steps. Same steel, same view, same idea. The only difference is whether the crowd showed up and whether the spot deserved them. The close-so. So you thought you were buying a tower, or maybe a view. You were not. You were buying the strangest product in all of real estate, altitude. A thing that costs almost nothing to hand over, that grows nothing and builds nothing and stores nothing, and that in the right city sells for the price of a fine dinner, per person, all day long, with 70 cents of every dollar falling straight to the bottom line. A man in Paris was mocked for building the most useless structure in France, and it became the most visited monument on Earth. A man in Las Vegas reached even higher, and lost it all inside a year. The steel was nearly identical. The difference was the crowd, and the spot, and whether the world decided to come. An observation tower does not sell a building. It does not sell a view. It does not even sell a thrill. It sells height. And height, it turns out, is the one thing people will always pay to borrow, and never get to keep.